understood is that they can provide great guidance. The CDC has led a good roadmap for us, but it is up to us as governors to operationalize that guidance into the best directives for our citizens. So whether it's stay-at-home orders, closing schools, what we do with restaurants or essential and non-essential businesses, and then obviously what we do with the relief funds. So there's a lot of relief funds or stimulus funds that are going to come in. We're the ones on the front lines that can best interact with our constituents and figure out how best to implement those recovery efforts.
So we heard about this gating process that lets you sort of, get up to that starting gate and begin phase one. Where's New Hampshire in that process?
There's a lot of states that are, if you look at their data, they're already on a bit of a downturn. We've hit a plateau, which is very good. We're not still skyrocketing like some other places are, but we've plateaued, but we're not really coming down yet. So our job is really to keep making sure that we're increasing the testing, because testing is critical in all of this. If we can keep increasing testing capacity, allowing folks to be isolated and segregated and quarantined as appropriate as we get more and more data to come into the door. Remember, we have Boston just 20 miles south of our border, and I think Governor Baker's been doing a great job, frankly, managing that situation. But we're very tied to Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts. We're all very tied together here, so we have to be very cognizant of that. And I think what the president and the White House has put out is a great roadmap, a great document. But again, it's going to be up to us governors to say, well, this piece applies and this piece can be a little more enhanced. But the idea that they're phasing it is very smart. The idea that they have these metrics and gating measures that we would have to meet as we go is very smart. But then again, we'll kind of take that document and tweak it for something more applicable in my state, in my case, for New Hampshire.
Yeah, when you look at the federal government was criticized a lot about the amount of testing that is out there, about the PPEs, the accessibility of masks. The president said at the beginning of this news conference, that's really all up to you guys. That's up to the governors. They have to make sure they have what they need in their states. Do you agree with that? Is that your responsibility?
At this point, it really is. Again, when this crisis first started, most states had a cache, if you will, of PPE, but nothing to the extent that was ever anticipated for what we needed. So we relied on FEMA. We have a strategic national stockpile we would draw down in multiple drawdowns from. And that's where we were really relying on our efforts. And a lot of the manufacturers were stuck only selling it back into FEMA. Same with testing materials. Everything was coming through FEMA to make sure, and I appreciate it, they want to make sure that the frontline crisis centers like Boston or New York or New Jersey were getting, their priority, and we appreciate that, but every state was having an issue. We've now been able to open up those commercial markets. Just last week, I brought in a chartered flight with FedEx with over 6 million pieces of PPE out of China. And it was a deal we cut kind of very quickly over the phone, bing, 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 and we got it done. We have more flights coming in. So we're now resupplying our PPE, and we're trying to share that with our neighbors as well. Most states are doing things like that, maybe not at that level, but everyone's trying to kind of resupply now that the commercial markets have opened up for us.
I think everybody hopes that we'll never have to rely on China for any of this equipment again, and I know that's in the works. But I got to let you go, but I just want to, just quickly, will the beaches be open in New Hampshire this summer? Do you think you'll be in the phase that will allow you to do that?
Very tough. It would be very tough because, again, we're so connected to Massachusetts and Maine. If it's like a tube of toothpaste, right? We're all clamping down. If I open up my beaches, but Massachusetts hasn't, everyone from Massachusetts is going to run into New Hampshire, or vice versa with Maine. So that's a good example of where we all have to take a regional step to make sure we're not overloading our state's resources with folks from out of state. And in the case of Massachusetts and New York, with states that have very high rates of COVID. So you got to be very careful about how you approach it. But we can find innovative ways to do it, and we're looking at different models now, whether it's for non-essential businesses, beaches, parks, hair salons, whatever it is. We're looking at different models for all of those things so we can start stepping open those things at the appropriate time.
Absolutely. Governor, thank you. Good to see you tonight. Thanks for being here. So we're going to bring in Dr. Ben Carson now, Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Dr. Carson, always good to have you with us as the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and also as a doctor, a surgeon. Do you feel comfortable with these phases, the way that they've been laid out? We know that Ohio says they're going to begin this on May 1.
Well, I'm very happy that we're doing it this way because this is logical and it's being done in such a way that you can monitor the impact of it. And you can see if there's trouble, you can identify it early on, and you can modify. And it's also being done in different parts of the country at different times. So you can concentrate a lot of attention on the areas where it's opening up, making sure that you catch the very earliest phases of a problem.
Well, we've seen a lot of leaders around the country who have said, you know, we're not doing this until we have a vaccine. You know, until you have a vaccine, you can't begin this process. You disagree with that, don't you?
Of course, you know, it may be a year or more before we have a vaccine. And, you know, if you wait that long, your economy is going to be completely dead, and it will bring along a lot of misery and death with it. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's not going to happen anyway, no matter what they say, because the people aren't going to let that happen.
You know, you see these protests around the country. I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
That's what I'm talking
you know,
about.
There's small groups in most of these places, and we're going to talk about it in a minute. But, you know, what's your reaction to that? Do you see that movement growing as people sort of become increasingly frustrated with not going to work?
Well, you know, the thing about the American people, first of all, I give them a lot of credit for, you know, being willing to abide by the guidelines that were put out there. And I think that's helped us out tremendously. American people are very patient and reasonable people, but they aren't going to sit there and let you destroy everything around them because you think you have a good idea. You know, they're going to use their common sense and their logic. And that's one of the things that I found when I was running for president. All over this country, in some of the smallest little hamlets, there were people there who had a lot of common sense. Decent individuals, not the ones that you see on the 6:30 news pouring water on the police and trying to shut other people down. That's not the way most Americans are.
Yeah. We're waiting for the new IHME model to come out, and we did hear guidance from one of the doctors who oversees it that it is likely to go lower than the 68,000 fatalities from COVID-19 that are expected. Do you think when you look at that model, and if it does go lower, and even lower than the flu was back in 2017, 2018, is that a fair comparison to make, to put those two numbers against each other, or is it not?
Well, one thing that's become increasingly clear is that sometimes these models are not all we expect them to be. And as Dr. Fauci always says, you know, you get out of the model what you put into it. If you don't have the right premise going into it, you're going to get, you know, irrational material coming out of it. And that's basically what's happened. But it does provide an opportunity to go back and look at the fundamentals of those models and maybe correct them so that the next time we aren't having the same kinds of issues. That's really the key to wisdom.
But so much of what we did was based on those models, Doctor. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these decisions were based primarily on those models.
And that's probably why there was some overreaction. You know, but you would much rather overreact than underreact in a situation where you have a pathological entity like the coronavirus.
Dr. Ben Carson, always good to see you, sir. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
You too.
So sources telling Fox News tonight, this is a big and growing story. There's increasing confidence now that COVID-19 did in fact originate in the lab that both Canadian leadership and U.S. leadership have donated to over the years in Wuhan, China. Senator Marco Rubio says that if that is true, there need to be serious consequences. So what exactly do those look like? And what's our relationship with China? Next.